Welcome to the 39th episode of Moving Forward on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm your host, Rob Simons. On this show, we discuss what is going on in the world and what we can do moving forward. And let me be the first to apologize. This has been a long time since I've really done my own show. I hope that you've appreciated the collaborative episodes I've done with Patrick Farnsworth, host of the podcast Last Born in the Wilderness. We've enjoyed doing the interviews together, and it's something that I see us doing at some point again in the future. And frankly, with everything that was going on in my life, it's a lot easier to have two people research somebody that you want to interview as opposed to you taking it on yourself. And, you know, the big shift in my life has been, of course, that now I'm a father and a new father, first-time parent. And I want to discuss a little bit some of the things that I feel like have changed with me, but I don't want to get into the whole episode to just discuss that. That will tie some of these things into other events. But, you know, first things first is when you have a child, everyone says everything changes. And from the second that you see your child, things change. And you know, don't get me wrong, when I saw my son for the first time, I felt that there was a rapid change in me, but I'm still trying to process what those changes are. I don't think it's something that, for me, I can know right away. So I think it's something that's going to take some time for me to figure out what kind of changes and what kind of shifts in my life have happened because of this. But one thing I would just say that I recognize right away with being a father is I'm much more present than I was before being a parent. Before I was a parent, people close to me would accuse me of living in the future, which is absolutely right. When you see a future trending towards absolutely catastrophic climate change. Meanwhile, we're seeing the rise of far-right ideology, and I would say even fascism, like places in Brazil. It's hard not to live in the future, especially when you're bringing a child into the world where really the way I look at it from a global standpoint, ecologically, and right now with the way things are going, is it's almost like the day he was born was the most hopeful, promising day of his life. And every day after that is going to get worse and worse. So I still have that in the back of my mind, but I've had to brush that aside a little bit because having an infant son, they need you right now. And they need you to be present with them. And they don't know about climate change. They don't know about racism or any of these things. So I think it's really helped me personally, and it's putting me in a better place. And I know people talk about a lot that we need to be present, and every day is a gift, and we never know how many days we have left. And sometimes that's easier said than done. And I guess this event that's happened in my life has kind of forced me to do that. So if there's things that you can do out there, and I don't say have a child, but I just mean in general, that can force you into being more present, explore those options. I think it can help all of our sanity a little bit. But with not having as much time, and that's including being able to do this radio show right now, is I work full time. And when I work, I come home and take care of my son until we go to bed. That's my life. And I'm enjoying it. You know, I have no complaints whatsoever. But with that, I don't have as much time to be on social media as I used to be, or to read articles from media outlets as much as I did. I used to read 5 or 6 articles a day, and now realistically, I'm lucky to read 5 to 6 articles a week. And it's been liberating, I must say. I feel like I'm in a better place for it because I think what happens with social media and just reading article after article, you read a social media post, you look at a meme, you click on an article, and it's like an assembly line. And I think the problem with that's happening to us as as a society, regardless of where you stand politically, is it's creating a lot of short-term thinking. It's not letting you sit with ideas for a while or even process some of the things that you've read. It's just read it, digest it, on to the next. And, I think that's what is leading to a lot of this depression, especially because we know that things aren't getting better. And to be reading about that time and time again can be depressing. And it's not helping us search for long-term ways to confront this. It's just all of what's happening in the short term and getting away from the historical. And like, for instance, one thing that I've done is the limited time that I have to myself is on the bus on the way to work, to and from work. And I've taken that time, instead of being on social media and reading news articles, I've taken that time to engage into what I would call more longer form thinking. And that would be like reading a book or listening to a podcast series, which I have a couple that I'm listening to right now that are absolutely outstanding. And what this does is it helps you sit with ideas for a while and hear the nuance to those ideas. Like I was on social media recently talking about Tulsi Gabbard and about how I question her. I think her foreign policy is much better than most candidates that are running for office, absolutely. But what I worry is that she's more of a isolationist instead of anti-war. So I was kind of just getting into that and saying that isolationism is a right-wing ideology, and that don't fall for that, because those can be used, that the right can use that as talking points to suck in some leftists, and we have to be mindful of that. And somebody said, like, basically, I don't want to listen to this podcast, because I was pointing to a podcast that's called the Eyes Left podcast. I think did a great job in dissecting Tulsi Gabbard. It's with Mike Preisner, who's the partner of Abby Martin, and I forget the other host is. His name's escaping me. Oh, Spencer Rapone. That's it. Both veterans, both served in the military, both know kind of the nuances of what she would say and what she's putting out there. And basically the person said, I don't have 72 minutes to listen to this, or that's not an effective use of my time. I'd rather take the 5 minutes to read an article. And essentially, it's not a direct quote, but paraphrasing, but that's the problem. In order to understand ideas and develop ways of thinking, we need long-term thinking, not the Donald Trump form of thinking where it's, I don't have time to read this whole brief, put it into cartoons, put it into bullet points. Like, this is the way I'm afraid a lot of our society is moving, and we need to recognize that. I think it's a problem. And Derek Jensen calls this the long, slow time, where you sit there and you almost daydream about things, and you just kind of are just kind of daydreaming and having these thoughts in your head and exploring those thoughts. And like, I think a lot of it is the stresses life gives us. We don't have time to do that. So I think that's a huge issue, but I think we need to make time to do that. As an only child, I did that a lot. A lot of it was entertaining myself. So I'm used to a lot of that stuff, and I enjoy it. And I think it's extremely, extremely helpful. And like, I guess one thing I could say is I've read some really powerful books, but just an idea of what to give you an example of what I mean by sitting with something for a while and seeing like what that means to you and what does that mean to everything that's going on today. There's this book called The Warmth of Other Suns, and it's by Isabel Wilkerson, and it's about the great migration of African Americans from the south of the United States to escape the brutal caste system that was placed in the South after slavery, and they were migrating to the north and to the west for a better life. They profile three different people. That one goes to Los Angeles, one to Chicago, one to New York. And this time period is from 1910 to 1970, where this great migration occurred. But there's something in there that stuck out to me in the book that I'm sitting with now, and I'd love to hear from you all, if anyone has anything to say about this, about the larger implications of this. And one of the people that was part of the migration was talking about how when he was growing up in the South, that the teachers used to beat him, his teachers, and his parents did, especially if he crossed a line where if a white person saw him doing that could get him killed, that can get him beaten, whatever, that they would take it about them to let them know their limits. And that it was almost a way of beating into the child that they are subhuman, that they can't do what white people can do, and they need to recognize that. And I just think about the trauma that's carried on from generation after generation, that's playing out now. How is that impacting our society today? That's what I wonder. And I think if we engage in longer form thinking, we can start thinking about these things and having really nuanced, better conversations with others. So that is a book I read that was great. I've read this book called The Overstory by Richard Powers, and obviously the show is geared more towards environmental issues, which I hope to shift away from, honestly, in the future. I think I've beat the environmental drum to death. I think everyone can get a grasp of what's happening to the environment. I'd like to shift this into other things that we can connect to the environment. But there's this book, and it's a fictional book by Richard Powers, and he talks about all these characters and how trees had a huge impact in their lives, and they all and they all are connected somehow. Throughout their life, they get connected with one another. And that's all I'll say. And it's a book that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Even though it's a fictional story, there's a lot of nonfiction in there, a lot of things to think about moving forward in our lives. Like, it made me think about what were the things growing up in my life that I was connected to in the natural world. And I think taking that inner child and that connectivity you had and moving that forward in your life now, it's so powerful. And it took him 600 pages, I think, about almost 600 pages to outline his ideas. And we need to take the time on those kind of things. If we want to, whatever limited free time we have, I would say spend it on that, chip away on some of those things. And I think that's where the short-term thinking, what happens with it, or short-form thinking, I think, is we get really, really upset, right? And it's almost like social media becomes this contest for who can be the most relevant. That's how I feel like it is a lot now, and it's extremely toxic. And what I'm seeing on social media more, and I say this not that I'm above it. I have been guilty of doing this myself, so let me be the first to say that. And it's something I'm recognizing in myself that I want to work on, but I'm also seeing it everywhere in social media too. So I'm part of this too. When I critique it, it's a self-critique as well. But it's becoming just a contest for relevancy, and it's starting to become a way. And I was listening to this podcast called Tangentially Speaking with Chris Ryan, and it was a great line he used where it's becoming a way. He's talking about political correctness, but I would say this applies to social media, where he's talking about that people are using their intelligence as a way to separate themselves from people. And when you do that, you're putting yourself on a path that leads to loneliness and bitterness. And I think that's correct. Especially if you're just going to shit on everybody, no matter what. And if they don't have every little view aligned with you, I think that's something we need to think about and try and meet people where they're at more. Because it is a lonely, bitter fight if it's just trying to come through political correctness or purity. And that's a losing strategy. I think it's defeatist politics, really. And I can give you an example of that, with political correctness. And then I'll get into identity politics too. Is with political correctness, here's an example of what I mean. So I was at the Occupy ICE movement I think it was on the 4th of July night, actually. I was there, and there was a vigil, and people were getting around and telling stories and heartbreaking stories about how they personally have a relative, or how they've been impacted by some of the new policies from the Trump administration, or even previous policies that affect immigrants trying to come into the United States from the global South, from South and Central America and Mexico. And they link these struggles to the struggles of Palestinians, which was very powerful to start linking all these things together. And so a woman gets up and introduces herself, and she says, I forget her name, but she says, my name is so-and-so, and my pronouns are she and her. And I just kind of scratched my head at that moment, because it was pretty clear that anyone who looked at this person, they weren't transgender, they weren't non-binary. Anyone who looked at the person could tell that her pronouns were she and her. So I didn't understand the point in bringing that up. I almost compare it to like if I were to have gotten up at that vigil and say, my name is Rob and I'm white and heterosexual and a male. Some of those things you could see on the surface, probably that's what I am. Now, I'm not saying that do not say what pronouns you are. I'm just saying I don't see the point if it's pretty obvious what your pronouns are. If it's not obvious, by all means, I'd like to know what your pronouns are, because I don't want to assault or offend anybody. But I feel like at that time, the vigil was building towards things about immigration and immigration policies. And I just didn't understand her bringing that up. I think that what we can do is we can bring these things up. I guess what I'm saying is I just didn't see it in that moment for her at all. Somebody else who you wouldn't be as clear, I could understand that. But I think it's important to not just say that, to say, and maybe that's not the group setting to get more personal about it, but in a smaller group or individual setting, just to talk about what your pronouns are and how it's impacted you when someone hasn't used the pronouns you prefer, or if you are transgender or non-binary, what that has been like to lead a life like that. Because obviously there's going to be stories that are going to be very powerful for people to hear. And I can't I can't say that somebody who's transgender or non-binary has given me a story like that. But what I can say is my former boss, she is Colombia. She's from Colombia, but she's black, but she's also Hispanic. But when you see her, you think she's just black, and that she does not identify as Hispanic. She identifies as both. And she took the time when I worked with her to sit with me and tell me what it feels like to be a black Hispanic woman under the Trump administration and how it's impacted her life. She took the time to tell me that the emboldening that she's seen in the state of Florida since Trump's election, the open racism, the fact that she's too afraid to drive through certain parts of the state and large swaths of the state because of this. And when someone takes the time to do that for you, I just shut up and listened. And it was such a powerful thing for me that it'll stay with me for the rest of my life. And I think we need to sort through too what's problematic versus political correctness. Someone may say things that are problematic that you don't agree with, but they also may say some things about certain topics that are dead on, that maybe have helped shape a little bit of your viewpoint. And I think that's okay. Instead of this, well, so-and-so said we can't read their work anymore. We can't listen to their talks anymore because they said this one thing that's problematic. We need to do a better job of understanding what's problematic, and okay, that's problematic, but there's certain things that somebody says that's also dead on. And figuring out what's problematic versus what is something that is dangerous. Where's your threshold? I think we need to start making sure we set certain guidelines. Because, like, to me, with identity politics and political correctness, like some of these things, like, to me, on the left, of course, we're anti-racist, we're anti-sexist, we're anti-war, we're anti-nativist, and we believe that climate change is a serious threat. At minimum. I mean, a lot of us think that it's more than that, including me, but I'm just speaking on the left in general. Those are basic things that I think, of course, we think about. And if someone hits those basic things, I think we're okay. And if they may say some other things we disagree with, I don't think it's off with their head and let's find out where they work and let's dox them and let's humiliate them and send them off into the oblivion. I think it's okay also to point out to people provocateurs or dangerous people trying to infiltrate the left, which I have done, and I'm not going to get into that here. I think it's okay to point that out. But I just think with political correctness, like if Fox News was at Occupy ICE in Portland and would have saw that woman get up, they would have exploited that and talked about how she introduced herself and then told her what pronouns she uses. They would have exploited that political correctness and showed this is the kind of stuff the left does. Because this is what Fox News does, and they're doing a great job of it. And others on the right, not just Fox News, but I'm just talking about the right in general, is exploiting these little things about using political correctness when there isn't really the point to do it at that point. And they're exploiting it, and they're winning. That's how I feel. So I think that we need to recognize that. Like I said, it's a losing battle. And it's defeatist politics. And identity politics is something that they are also exploiting and winning on that. I mean, the perfect example of how identity politics does not work is the election of Barack Obama. I fell for it, in 2008. I was young, naive, was 26 years old. And I fell for the whole Barack Obama thing and that we'd be progressing as a nation if we had the first black president. And look at what happened. We found out he was the same corporate politician that his predecessors have been, if not worse, if not ramping up more things than other presidents have. And so what happened when we elected our first black president here in the United States? We then elect a white supremacist. That was the result. So it shows you how much this isn't working for us on the left, that we need to figure something else out. Because if you don't think Donald Trump is a white supremacist, I don't know where you've been. I don't know what you've been watching, what you've been reading, especially to me when he said at a rally in Pensacola a couple of weeks ago that he laughed at, someone said to shoot immigrants crossing the border. He laughed at it. He thought it was hilarious to shoot human beings, particularly brown human beings. If that doesn't tell you that he's a white supremacist, I don't know what does. That's where we're at right now. So, and I think it's really important what we see and read on the internet, we take it seriously. That we don't think, some things people will say, people think are funny. because it's so far away from their viewpoint. But it's not funny. It's something we need to take seriously. And the perfect example I can give you is with Russiagate. So who's the winner of Russiagate? I would argue, whether they're still debating was there collusion, was there not collusion, or I don't know if that's the debate anymore. I don't follow it extremely close because I don't think whatever happened would make a big difference. What are you going to do? Impeach Donald Trump and put in a Christian fascist like Mike Pence? But was there collusion? Was there not? And there's over 300 former U.S. attorneys that are saying that he should at least be charged with obstruction of justice. Maybe that's the case. I think he should have been too. I don't think there was collusion, but obstruction of justice, I definitely think. As of right now, maybe that changes, but just from what I've read. But people will say the mainstream media won this because of all the ratings they got, right? Everyone was tuning in and to see what was going on. And really the mainstream media doesn't get that much viewership if you look at it. If you look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but it's not what people think they are. So I don't think the mainstream media won because like MSNBC won because they got increased viewership, which means added ad revenue and stuff like that. No. I think the reason they won is because they were able to start censoring people because of Russiagate hysteria. That's the reason they won. And when you look at it, what did it start with? It started with Google algorithm. It started with this Proper Not article in the Washington Post listing all these media outlets on both the right and left that are alternative media outlets as quote unquote fake news or Russian agents, right? Some of the ones that I'm sure people read on here, like Counterpunch. I write for Counterpunch. Haven't written anything in a while, but occasionally I do. Truth Out, right? Another great media organization. Labeled them as on this list. Black Agenda Report, another one. There's many more, but so what ended up happening? What did we start seeing? We started seeing Google put in these algorithms where if you were looking for news results, none of these outlets would show up in the news. And it started significantly dropping a lot of the people's traffic. Like I want to say Alternet reported like at least over 50% decrease in traffic because of these algorithms placed by Google, right? So they start directing more people away from these websites, which is hard for them to get funding because a lot of them, it's we the people that fund these outlets through donations. They're harder to find now. If you just look in this news result, you have to Google the actual media organization's name to find it. So it starts there, right? And then we move on to Facebook. Facebook starts telling us what's fake news, what's not. They start removing certain pages. And, they removed people from the right that I loved that they removed, like Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones, but they also removed left-leaning pages too. Just gone. So, and then on top of that, the one of the scariest ones of them all is this NewsGuard software that's going to be put into Microsoft Windows software. What NewsGuard will do is it'll put a red light on a media organization you can't trust and a green light on one you can. It's a color-coded system. And it makes me wonder, where did they get that color-coded system from? To me, is it a coincidence that the first ever head of the Homeland Security was created under George W. Bush, Tom Ridge, is on the board? Coincidence? I think not. Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA and DIA, also on the board. Also being run by neocons. Whitney Webb from Mint Press News does a great piece going into that. Really, NewsGuard is a neocon. It's a neocon company with neocon ties. And what did the neocons tell us? The neocons told us that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and got us into that war. And what did they have? They didn't, right? So these are the people that are going to tell us which news is fake and which news is not. And so we've moved, we see these elements, and then now we're moving into something else, which is the banning of ideologies. Like Instagram and Facebook have banned white nationalist or white supremacist ideologies in some cases, which I applaud, right? Obviously, of course, I think deplatforming some of these people has been effective if getting their, for them to get their news out. It's harder for their voice to be heard. With some of these people, I think is great, especially when you have someone like Milo Yiannopoulos on this right-wing social media platform Gab, calling for civil war in America. Putting out dangerous rhetoric like that. But this is a private company, and we have seen that it's not been excluded, that, the left isn't excluded from this. So that's why I think it's important to see what people are saying on the internet, especially people who have a platform. And what they're calling themselves, what their end game is. I think this is so important, that on the surface, maybe, somebody's anti-capitalist, or they believe, yes, industrial civilization is destroying the planet, but they're human hating. They think humans are parasites. They think the human race needs to go extinct as fast as possible to save the planet, or quote, quote, save the livable planet, right? Not all humans are bad. And I see people that even with this thought that identify themselves as eco-Nazis. And that's incredibly dangerous. Not only is it anti-Semitic to use that frame and to be proud of calling yourself any kind of Nazi, which is incredibly dangerous. What if I just wonder, with people being radicalized by social media now, we're seeing more mass shootings because of things people are reading on these chat rooms in 8chan and 4chan or Reddit, or things that Ben Shapiro's saying. That was a big reason why a mosque was shot up in Quebec. I think they looked at the shooter he searched Ben Shapiro more than anybody else. So what happens, my question is, as somebody who's very concerned about the environment, very concerned what's going to happen to our species, understands that it's capitalism and industrial civilization that is devouring the planet. But what happens if someone gets across one of these human-hating chat rooms, videos, podcasts, whatever, collapsitarian, human-hating thought that all humans are parasites, which I don't believe at all. There's so many good people in this world that are trying to do the right thing. And it seems like these collapsitarians have forgotten the fact that we're born into these set of living arrangements. We didn't choose it. We were born into it. But so what happens, right? We see these mosque shootings where they'll go up and shoot a particular segment of society, whether it's Jewish people, Muslim people, or Arabic people, from the Middle East. What happens if you get radicalized because of a whole human race and you want to take out your anger and violence and the way your life is because of that? What kind of violence would we see for that? And then what happens in turn if there is an act of violence committed, and if somebody is, Facebook says, all right, you think capitalism's problem with is causing environmental degradation, and you think industrial civilization is, you use those words, you're an eco-Nazi, you're an eco-fascist, we're censoring you. A lot of programs on PRN would be censored. A lot of people, writers and thinkers that I respect, that have good intentions, that don't think all humans are bad people, could be censored. And those ideas could be harder to get out of what some of the culprit is of what's happening to our planet. These are things we really need to think about moving forward. And that's why I think it's so important to get someone's end game, because what I've been reading when I'm doing this long form thinking that I'm talking about is I'm reading about how the right uses a lot of left-leaning talking points to suck in people from the left. like I told you, like isolationism, like maybe being anti-capitalist, and that they're promoting socialism, but socialism for a particular race, not for everybody or a particular gender or whatever. And Matthew Lyons in his book Insurgent Supremacist goes and talks about this at length. I'd highly recommend people read that book so we can start sorting through some of these things. So I guess that's really all I wanted to say at this point. I know it's probably a little bit more of a shorter show than normal, but like I said, it's just been a little bit of a struggle to try to get things together with having a newborn son, and my time is very limited. I'm just happy I was able to get the time to do this. And, you know, I hope to move forward with this work with getting past the science of climate change. There's so many people that I'm talking to now that are sick of hearing. They're not sick, I'm not saying that. They are really upset with hearing the science, but they understand it, and they get what's happening. But now what? What are some other things that are happening? What are some other culprits? What do we do now with this information? I think that's the biggest question we're all trying to answer that nobody knows. What do we do moving forward with this? Which I wanted to end the show, which I if you notice, I like ending the show with music. I think music can be uplifting and try to send people out on a high note, despite everything that's happening. And usually I'll break down a song and kind of point out some lyrics and how it ties into some of the things that I talk about on this show or some of my guests talk about. Because let me just say this before I get into that. You know, I try my best to get things right, but I also try to be flexible in some nuances of my beliefs. You know, I have a solid core beliefs, but I understand the nuances may change. So I'm not always going to get things right, but my intention is to try my best. And I will make mistakes and continue to make mistakes. I think we should recognize that in one another. So with that being said, the song that I want to play is called Crystal Ships by Michael Oakley. And instead of me say what the song is about, I'll let him tell you what the song is about. Crystal Ships is about my best friend from high school that died when he was just 15 years old. When it happened, I wasn't able to even begin to deal with something like that at that age. The devastation that comes from such a tragic event and the questions you're ultimately left with set me down a very dark path that lasted many years and was a long and lonely road that only I could walk. No one could help me, and I couldn't even talk about it without crying inconsolably. I also lost my mother when I was 27 years old, and another best friend shortly after, which again has taken a long time to accept and to come to terms with. When it comes to grief, they say there's usually 5 stages that people go through: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. I think grief changes shape, but it definitely never ends. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my fallen loved ones and miss them, or wonder how different my life might be right now if they were still here with me. I'll never know for sure, but I hold on desperately to the hope I will see them once again when the bell tolls for me and it's my time to join them in the dance of the immortal angels. Life is short, so while you're here, I implore you to be kind and understanding of one another. Make a point of regularly telling people round about you that you care about them, you appreciate them, and most importantly, you love them. We are all here on this earth sharing the same human experience and all go through the same kind of emotions at different stages of our lives. Never forget, we are all just crystal ships passing by. So here's to all the crystal ships in our lives, past and present. Thank you for listening to Moving Forward on the Progressive Radio Network.
time slipped from your hourglass. So I'm laying all the memories out with dreamers, trailblazers, keepers who think they know it all. We were sailing by the lonely streetlights, thought we'd never fall. In my darkest days I'm falling down. Give me wings to fly this cold heart out. Sometimes I get this feeling, it comes and goes. Wonder what my life would be with you here, but I'll never know. 'Cause it's cold on the outside. I'll spend my whole life waiting for one more chance. My arms are reaching to hold you and join in the dance. Or are we crystal ships just passing by? So I'm hanging to a night scene in the town that we both carved out. Traced our idols from the big screen, but now the picture's losing sound. Oh, your voice fills my head. Can you tell me where you've run? 'Cause the lonely street lights hold no answers on what this world's become without you. Running every risk to claim myself, taking chances like nobody else. Sometimes I get this feeling, it comes and goes. Wonder what my life would be with you here, but I'll never know. 'Cause it's cold on the outside. I'll spend my whole life waiting for one more chance. My arms are reaching to hold you and join in the dance. Or are we crystal ships just passing by? I'll spend my whole life waiting